Good evening and welcome to our second Scotland's Political Leaders in Conversation with the Highland Business Partnership. My name is Liam Christie from Christie's Consultants Scotland and will be your main host for this evening, along with John Murray, one of the founders of the Highland Business Partnership. Our second guest this evening is Willie Rennie, the MP for North East Fife and current leader of the Scottish Liberal Democrats, and joining us as well as the candidate for Inverness and Nairn for the Scottish Liberal Democrats, David Gregg. Good evening, gents. John, I'm going to come to you first of all to give our guests a little bit of an overview of the Highland Business Partnership, just in case they're not aware.
Okie dokie. So welcome guys, Willie and David. So the Highland Business Partnership was formed really, we felt that something new was required for the Highlands, a voice and something different. And we, along with a few other business folk, we formed a new group. Within 2 weeks, we had over 1,000 businesses within the group, which was phenomenal. It's now sitting at 1,600 businesses, just Highland businesses, multi-sector, multi-size, from massive companies to home workers. And it's been a support mechanism for each other. It's been a business opportunity to do business with each other from within the Highlands. It's been, yes, a humbling experience. So we, up until today, nobody really was told much about it outside of Facebook. We've now got a bi-monthly column in the Executive magazine, to which we'll be able to tell people what we're up to, etc. And we're going about to build a business directory for the Highlands so that people can get a listing on and know what's out there. Because it's amazing how many businesses we didn't really know existed, to be fair. Okay, so it's about supporting the Highlands in more ways than one, doing business, you know, moral support, etc. It's been phenomenal, been great, really positive experience. Now it's taking it next level, and we want to, you know, put a fair and honest challenge to politicians and public sector bodies as well at the same time. So watch this space, really. So back to Liam.
Thank you for that, John. Great overview. So that gives you an overview of where we are, chaps. So David and Willie, welcome along. Please give us an overview of what the Scottish Lib Dems plan to offer the Highlands and Islands should your party be successful in the forthcoming Scottish election. I'll give you a few minutes between yourselves, gents. Thanks.
Do you want to go first, David?
Sure.
Yeah.
So I think in a lot of ways, the challenges that face the businesses in the Highlands and Islands are similar challenges to those that face the sort of the residents of the Highlands and Islands as well. We see the problems with fuel poverty, that fuel costs aren't just something that affects the average household, that businesses will have their problems with fuel costs, particularly in some of our outdated and older buildings in the Highlands, that we see the problems with mental health. They affect all the people in the Highlands, which means that businesses are affected by absentees, days from work, things like that. And we see the challenges that climate change and the need to transition to a green economy faces the businesses of the Highlands, not just the residents. So I think the offer that the Liberal Democrats offer to the people of the Highlands will provide similar benefits to the businesses of the Highlands. That if we can reduce fuel costs for businesses, that will make life for businesses easier. If we improve mental health in the Highlands, it makes doing business in the Highlands much easier. For especially small companies, that if you lose 1 out of your 3 employees because they're having a difficult time with their mental health, that's really challenging. So if we can improve that, the better. And supporting businesses through the transition into the greener economy is sort of a key part of our platform, with sort of free carbon, sort of decarbonisation advice being part of the policy programme. I think is a useful area that most businesses will want to take advantage of, because businesses want to do the right thing by the environment.
That's great, David. And we're going to come back into some more of that detail, what you mentioned with some of the questions that have been presented here for each one of the leaders and the candidates that appear on these Q&As with ourselves throughout the course of the next couple of weeks. Willie, over to you. Have you got anything else to summarise there?
Yeah, no, thanks very much, David. That was good. So in this election campaign, we are saying that we need to put recovery first. It should be the top priority. We've been through a hell of a year. We need to make sure that mental health services that David talked about, the education system, kids have lost an awful lot of education, creating jobs, particularly in the green economy, but also taking action on the climate. So that's our central pitch. We don't think we should have another debate about independence, which we think, even no matter what you think about independence, it's going to divide the country by its very nature. It's a binary question, and we should be putting all our focus behind trying to deal with these issues. But how can we help you specifically? For us, we need to do, a major part of your economy is around about tourism. We need to make sure that the infrastructure is in place to support the tourism businesses. So making sure that the proper grant support mechanisms in place to create the new caravanning and camping facilities, make sure there's sufficient toilets, making sure the roads are up to standard on the key tourism routes now, which are heavily utilised and in quite a poor condition. Making sure that then we move on to broadband, and you've had a rough deal on broadband because you were promised it was going to be sorted soon, but it's going to be another 3 or 4 years, if we're lucky, before those things are sorted. Yeah. And I know these community fibre partnerships and local initiatives that have taken place are incredibly hard work. You're going to almost somebody full-time working on these things to make them work. So the system's complex. Every time they chuck in a new grant, the whole thing goes back to the drawing board and starts all over again. So broadband is a major part. Skills. And we're wanting to offer quite a big package on skills and training. So 16 to 24-year-olds. We want to offer a guaranteed job or a training place for all people in that age group. And we've launched today a new graduate paid internship. So we can get graduates in, particularly into SMEs, because those kind of positions are often not available for SMEs. Sometimes you need a bigger company in order to take on new people like that, because it's quite expensive for training and support and all that. So we are offering 2,000 paid internships, particularly targeted towards the SMEs. And then, of course, there's your infrastructure in terms of the roads. We need to make sure that the A9 and the railway system is improved significantly, as well as all the cycling facilities as well, because trying to compete between cyclists and motorists on the road is quite difficult. So we want to make sure there's additional infrastructure and support going in to that. And then I suppose the final thing is, how do we make sure that businesses are playing a central role in the economic development strategy of an area? Because too often it's heavily dominated by the public sector. And we need to make sure that the private sector, private employers, have an easy access route, because you're busy as it is. How do you carve out enough time to be able to have an input into the college strategy, into the HIE strategy, to make sure that your priorities are considered within there, rather than it being the government's priorities, which they think fit around you. So that is a major part. Now, as I say, you don't have that much time. And sometimes the language in these things is almost a completely different language. So understanding how the system works. So a proper engagement, but also then, in order to exploit, and you've got an awful lot of potential industrial facilities in the Highlands and Islands, the Arnish Yard, but also in Invergordon, and the various other facilities. We need to make sure that you've got a strategy that's led by industry to exploit the potential, because we're missing big opportunities for offshore renewables. And then a final one is, when government comes along and makes big promises, we need to make sure that those promises are realistic. That in particular around about Lochaber, where much was promised in terms of the smelter, and it's taken an awful long time to deliver, and we're not quite sure whether it is going to be delivered. We need to make sure that businesses are tied in with those strategies, so we understand that they're workable strategies, and they can be delivered, and they're going to bring a wider benefit to the business community, because there's an awful lot of spin on these things. and sometimes very little deliver. Anyway, I could talk forever. So
yeah,
I'll
it's okay, Willie. No, we get the passion, chaps. We get the passion. We're going to move on with some of the questions. You've covered a bit of this with an overview. I'd like to jump forward with some of the questions that you've picked on there, just picking up some of the points. You talked about the skill shortage, and we have a skill shortage in the Highlands with young people leaving the region for learning and career opportunities. So, and balancing affordable accommodation with jobs prospects in the Highlands is extremely difficult. And we know the CBI report that was pre-COVID said that 9 out of 10 people were going to have to upskill, particularly youngsters, by 2030 to reskill or take on new training for new jobs. What are you going to do, or incentives that you can do around that from the Scottish Liberal Democrats' position?
I mean, if we're honest with ourselves, some young people want to go off to the city and get a new job and a new opportunity. Some of the people want to do that. So this is not for everybody. But those who do want to stay local, they should be given the chance to stay local. And I know all too well about how high accommodation costs. In fact, the lack of accommodation full stop means that people, if they want to live in their own house, they have to leave. And I've seen it myself of how accommodation in my constituency is swallowed up by second homeowners, which are an important part of the economy, don't get me wrong. You know, the holiday lets, an important part of the economy, but we've got to keep it in balance because there's a danger that some of these communities just topple over. Yeah. If you don't have enough of a working population living and working, keeping the school alive, keeping the shops alive all year round, then the community just topples over. So therefore, I mean, I've got in one community, a little place called Ely. It's the place to live in East Fife. There's hardly any locals live there now. Mm-hmm. And it's not good for the community. You need a better balance. So the changes that we've got to the holiday let arrangements, to the short-term let arrangements, I think need to be implemented sensitively, but I think they could make a big difference in just keeping the balance right in the community. But then we're talking about supply. Building rural housing is often more expensive. Because you've tended to build smaller units. Sometimes the infrastructure isn't there. Sometimes the supplies aren't there either. Getting the right land from the right people. So you need to fully utilize the compulsory purchase powers to make sure we can get the land that we need. But we also need to make sure that we've got additional per house costing. The price that comes from the government for the rural housing needs to be higher to make sure that happens. Because we've got a commitment to build 60,000 affordable homes, 40,000 of them should be for social rent. Social rent protects them from ongoing sale to second homes. So anyway, a lot of that needs to go to the Highlands and rural areas. It needs to have a higher subsidy level. And we need to make sure that on the other end of the scale, we're protecting the accommodation that we've got. So we're not just leaking them out into second homes and holiday lets at the other end. As I say, it's a delicate balance because the holiday let business is important for us, but we need to make sure that it doesn't knock communities out of balance altogether.
Okay, well, I appreciate that. Good points. David, I'm going to come back to you. You talked about mental health as being part of the manifesto, a big part of that. So what is it you're going to do in terms of, implementing cash into this area for the Highlands and Islands? David, if you like.
Yeah, so there's sort of two key promises I think that we've made. The first is something we worked on pre-COVID. Unfortunately, it got cancelled by the pandemic, but the Liberal Democrats were sort of key in passing the idea of getting mental health first aiders into every workplace so that people who are struggling with mental health can get support in the place they spend most of their time. Most people probably spend more time with some of their colleagues at work than they do their own families. So having support in their own workplace, I know that in my job as a doctor, I'm busy a lot of the time. And if I've got support in my workplace, it's much easier for me to stay mentally healthy than it is if I have to try and do that in my own free time. The promise we made more recently is to double the number of counsellors training to take on mental health work. Because it's a key part of the workforce that most mental health problems, people don't need to see psychiatrists, you don't need to see the medical stuff about it. You can see a counsellor, you can see people in a different setting, and we know how difficult and how few psychiatrists there are in the Highlands. So the more work we can give into the sort of counselling workforce, the more we're going to be able to help the population.
Okay, thanks for that. Just want to come on to another couple of questions, and I'll bring you in then, John. The Highlands are blessed with many natural assets, providing a large and contribution part to Scotland's biggest industries. We talked about green energy earlier, you mentioned that, food and drink and tourism. But it's often felt here in the Highlands, I don't know if you felt that yourself, David, but as a business community, we are not heard loud enough at Holyrood. Do you think that's fair comment? And if so, what changes would you provide provide closer links to the region for local Highland businesses?
I certainly think it is a fair comment, because some of the problems that I've been contacted with during this campaign are things that could have been avoided if there'd been proper links with the Highland business community, that multiple B&B owners in particular, that multiple people falling through the gaps in support schemes for B&Bs that for some reason were not classed as hospitality businesses, for B&Bs that don't pay different types of rates, not qualifying for any schemes at all. That if these things if there'd been a stronger Highland business voice at Holyrood, I really think these things could have been avoided, because some people are either just getting paid now, and we're a year into the pandemic, and some people are sat there with no money at all coming in. And I think you see similar things in Westminster. It's not just the voice that's lost in Holyrood. You see that with changes made to exporting shellfish down in Argyll, that people have really suffered there. And that's from a lack of a voice in the Westminster government as well. As to the actual sort of changes that would be made, I think the work that you guys are doing at the Highland Business Partnership, that actually getting the voice together in the Highlands first is a really important step. Because if we're not talking together locally, it's really hard to then take our voices into Holyrood and into Westminster. I think Willie's probably better place to talk about any sort of practical things to do at Holyrood itself compared to me, so I'll let him speak on that.
Well, that's fine, David. I'm not going to cut you off, Willie. I'm just conscious of time here till we get through some of the other questions. So it's good to hear that you feel the same as the local businesses do. John, you want to jump in with anything just now before I push on? Are you okay?
No, but I would like to hear Willie's view on how we get that at the sharp end.
Don't bother, overridden by the boss, Willie, so on you go.
Know your place, Ian.
Absolutely. Just because I've got a waistcoat doesn't mean I'm in charge.
To me, often it is about making sure that you distill down exactly what you want from us. Keep it really clean and simple, because sometimes we're very simple people. And we need to understand exactly what it is you want. So a well-rounded argument goes an awful long way, and then just persist until you get there. But, you know, having good representatives locally who are able to amplify that does help as well. People who can take the message into Holyrood. And, you know, the benefit of Holyrood is that it is quite a small place. You can get access to ministers relatively easily, and we can help you do that. So on a practical level, that's what we're prepared to do.
So keep it simple, and persistence beats resistance.
That's the one, yes. John.
I should have just said that. I should have just said that, John.
Good. Okay, chaps.
I'll use that for the next time.
Just to move on quickly now, the pandemic has brought many challenges for businesses, particularly here in the Highlands. Some sectors have been deeply affected. We know ourselves personally about events, performance and arts, hospitality and tourism being one of obviously the main drivers here within the Highlands. What support measures are you going to propose to give these businesses a chance to get to the next season's trading in April 22, God willing, for us to do that? So, you know, we've had grants and schemes. How do we support them in the Highlands and Islands to get to that full season opening with the restrictions still in place?
So to me, it's quite simple. The grants need to follow the restrictions. As the restrictions ease, then the grants can ease. But they need to need to be maintained until then. Furlough likewise, it all needs to be maintained. However, there continue to be costs, even if you are getting that support, because it's not 100% of your costs, and you can't survive forever. So but the best way of making sure that we get you up and running again is getting to a place where the restrictions are eased and you are able to open up. There will be big opportunities this year. I'm quite optimistic about it. I think the domestic market will be significant. There's a pent-up demand. People are desperate to get out. Believe me, people from Fife are desperate to get out. They want to go somewhere else for a change. And so you will see a lot of people coming. It's been able to get that in a sustainable way is the challenge for a long period, because there's only so much capacity that you've got. So making sure we've got an offer that's there throughout, and it's when it's available. That does go back to my earlier point about the infrastructure in the community, because sometimes with the surge of people that you get, the facilities just cannot cope. I've seen it for myself. And it's the simple things as toilets make such a big difference for that. But what we need to make sure is that this is the last lockdown. We're not going back. We want to make sure that as we ease this, the consumers have the confidence that it's going to last. So they start booking longer term bookings, so you can get some cash into your business. And so that, because if they don't have the confidence, if they believe that the government's moved too quickly, then they won't book. So therefore getting that moving, and then that will help the rest of industry as well, and the rest of the sector too. So to me, on the tourism side, it's really important. Confidence has got to be at the centre of it. And until that confidence is restored, we've got to have the business grants in place.
Great answer. That's what we want to hear, Willie. Fantastic.
Good.
Opportunities have arisen for some, obviously, through the pandemic, and the awareness and the need to look after our planet more has clearly been one of those. So what incentives would you introduce to encourage Highland companies to improve their impact on the planet, more friendly packaging, electric vehicles, energy reductions, and solutions to those? What incentives would you put in place?
So we need to have a network of charging points, fast charging points, and we've got that in our manifesto commitment to deliver on that. On the domestic side, I've got a bit of an obsession about air source heat pumps. I want to make sure that we've got 1 million air source heat pumps in this country, and that flows through into the business sector as well. If we can get those in place, they're not only cheaper, if we get the right grants in place to support the capital infrastructure that's required for them, but then we also get benefits of lower energy costs going forward, and it's good for the climate too. But we need the workforce, and we are short of people who can do this.
Yeah.
A mixture of the plumbers and the electricians is what we need to make this happen. And so therefore we need a massive training exercise, reskilling, to make sure those who are working perhaps in oil and gas sector are retrained to work on this. I want to get 1 million by 2030. It's quite an ambitious thing to do. We're currently putting in peanuts numbers of these things. So we need to move faster on that to make sure. Now that will be good for business too. And then the final thing is making sure we've got the right insulation packages, which sounded deadly dull, and it's difficult to believe that we're still at this stage and we're still talking about insulation. But there are so many homes that don't have the right standard. Again, another good business opportunity to make sure that we can, because we'll need people to do this work, we'll need them trained and skilled, and all of that will throw into the business sector as well. So those are the things that we want to put in place to make that happen. We've got £5,000 retraining and reskilling grants for people to take advantage of. And we think that combined together means we can really get a crack on with the climate emergency changes.
No, that's really encouraging to hear, Willie. One of the other questions that I put to Douglas earlier was excluding businesses in the Highlands, many of which have had no support. What's your take on that with excluded businesses within Scotland, and how do you see being able to push Westminster to loosen the purse strings to help those businesses that need more support?
I'm not optimistic, I have to say. We badgered the Westminster government for a long time to change this. So I could understand immediately why we set up the systems we did, basically reversing the tax systems that we've got to put money back into people's pockets. It was essential for the economy as well as their well-being and finances. That was important. It was a no-brainer to do it the way they did. What I think they missed a trick was once they got that in place, then putting in a more comprehensive, I mean, we were arguing for a universal basic income, which would make sure that nobody fell between the gaps. Now, there is a campaign, Jamie Stone, one of my colleagues in the part of the world, has been running the campaign on the excluded, and he's been doing a great job on that, and he's closed some of the gaps. But it's taken a hell of a lot of effort to get to that point, and I'm not confident they're going to go further in time before the things are eased. The Scottish Government, to be fair, have put in some grant systems that have filled some of the gaps as well, which has been quite helpful. Bit slow, bit sluggish. The first round were pretty good, but this time round, the systems are a bit too complicated. It's taken a long time to get the money out. Taxi drivers was one example.
Yeah.
It just was botched. Mm-hmm. And so therefore, but they are trying their best. And I think both governments, to be honest, tried their best. But I'm not optimistic we'll be able to fill all the gaps before things are eased, I'm afraid. We just need to get the economy moving. That's the best way of making sure we get money back into people's pockets.
Yeah, absolutely. No, I'm glad to hear that, Willie. And it's probably a bit of realism there, but yes, we need to do more quickly if we can. Before we wrap up, I would like to give you the opportunity just to put your voice out there as to why people should vote for you across the Highlands. John, I'm just going to come to you before we cut off the Zoom, because I know once we stop it, that's it, and it's goodbye. So, John, anything else? Are you happy now?
No, I'm happy. I'd rather give the time over to the guys to sell your wares and get your votes.
There you go.
Thanks for coming, guys.
You've got a couple of minutes left.
David, you do a minute and I'll do a minute.
Hey.
Okay. So I think the reason you should vote for the Liberal Democrats across the Highlands and Islands on both your ballots is that we are offering solutions to the problems that affect people every day in the Highlands. We are not focusing on constitutional issues, which, while are important, and there's nothing most Liberal Democrats love than discussing minor constitutional things that are in our own organisation, but we're actually really focused on problems that affect everyday people, that affect the costs of running people's homes, and wanting to focus on fuel poverty, the costs of poor mental health, wanting to make people's lives better that way, and in fighting climate change, which is something we all need to deal with. So I think the reason you should vote for us is that we are focused on the problems that affect you. And I'll let Willie take his minute.
Thank you, David.
So we need people like David in Parliament. Tremendous experience, real depth of experience of the NHS, understands exactly how it works. So we need good people like him in Parliament. Molly Nolan up in Caithness, excellent representative, fresh young face who will bring a new kind of burst of life into the Highlands. Liberal Democrats, Liberals before, have got a strong connection with the Highlands. Charles Kennedy, John Thurzo, Russell Johnson, Danny Alexander, real champions for the Highlands. It's in our soul. The Highlands is important to us. So if you want champions for the Highlands, then we're the ones for you.
Thank you very much indeed, chaps. Big thank you again to yourselves for giving us all your words, and good luck in the coming election. Thanks to DP Digital Media for all the tech and support, John from Highland Business Partnership, and Douglas previously in the evening. Thanks very much indeed. All the best, chaps.
All the best, guys.
Thanks again.
Cheers.
Thanks.